evening, everyone, and welcome to Portland Christian Senior High School and Junior High School PC mock election. Tonight we'll be presenting you the press conference of the two candidates and asking them some questions before the coming presidential debate on Friday during your elective period at the end of the day. Now, as it sounds like it is, let's get started and move over to Caden. Caden Schroeder, take it away from me, please.
Welcome to our 2022 press conference. On the conservative side, we have Danielle Buckenmeyer running for president and Bubba Johnson running for vice president. On the liberal side, we have Frederick Pittman running for president and Kevin Liu running for vice president. We are going to ask some questions today, and then during the debate we will have further introduction and explanation of people's sides. First question, how are you going to balance the budget? Start with you guys.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by balancing the budget?
With all of the different positions you're taking, how are you going to balance the budget to fulfill the desires of your voters?
Yeah, so we're mainly focused economics-wise on inflation, and that's our biggest priority is to lower inflation. And so ways that we're going to do that, we're going to decrease taxes, and we're going to focus on making a freer market and spending tax dollars where the American people want it in ways like education.
We plan to work with the Federal Reserve to raise interest rates. This is a method that has been proven to work both in the 1980s and present time. So we plan to stick to this course of action.
Thank you. Regarding healthcare, what are your opinions and action plans on lowering prescription drug costs? You may start.
We'll create a law that allows the government to negotiate with pharmaceutical companies so that we can bring down the price of prescription drugs. This will actually be saving the government money and make pharmaceuticals more accessible for the customers.
We have a similar stance. We also agree that prescription drugs are priced too highly and that having government negotiations with pharmaceutical companies would benefit everybody in the United States.
And what is your plan for the healthcare system? We have, the polling has shown that there's a 50-50 interest in making healthcare completely free versus making healthcare completely paid for by the government.
Yeah, so free healthcare sounds really nice and it sounds very idealistic, but when you actually put it into practice in countries like Canada or in like England that has free healthcare, it ends up increasing taxes significantly because healthcare is a very expensive issue no matter what happens. Hospital bills are just insanely high. And so to make completely free healthcare is not in favor of the American people due to that high tax rate. So we plan to make healthcare as affordable as possible while not driving up taxes. We're going to keep Medicare and Medicaid because we believe that that's very crucial to the American healthcare system. But we are not in favor of making healthcare free due to the current state of inflation and the taxes right now.
We want people to have at least like the option to look at different types of healthcare insurance, and like we want it to be accessible for everyone. Like roughly 30 million of Americans don't have healthcare. They didn't have health insurance in 2021. That's roughly 9% of the population, and that's why I think we need to fix that.
Okay, next we're going to go into law and order. How are you going to support police officers within controversies?
Within controversies, we want to train police to be better, and we want to further comprehensive gun control. As for police reform, we don't want to defund the police, but we want to better fund them in order to provide better training and more police, and we want them to be adaptable to certain situations and more adaptable to their surroundings and people around them.
Yeah, so in terms of supporting the police during these controversies, one thing that we want to do is increase respect between the police and the American people and bring back a relationship where everybody feels safe, because that's ultimately the goal of our law and order system, is to create safety. And another thing that is really important is that we're going to increase racial justice training for our police, bringing in experts on the subject who know more about this than obviously me or Bubba do, bringing people to educate police officers on how to deal with situations of racial discrimination and make America more united.
And going off of that, how are you going to address the desires of the people to have either more police officers in the police force, or having police reform within the police force as it is right now?
Yeah, so I think you can have both. So while increasing police, you can also regulate the trainings to make them more comprehensive and put it more towards the goal of reform within the police system. I don't think reform necessarily means cutting back. I think you can have reform with even more police officers and just making tighter boundaries about the responsibility of what it means to yield that title of a law enforcement officer.
We don't want to abolish the police. We want to ensure that they know how to actually interact with people in individual circumstances. For example, in the case of immediate medical situations, like police should know what to do and have the training to back up the people that help them and they're informed properly.
And how specifically are you going to address that?
We're going to address that by training the police, like changing the system in general, not just changing the way that it works, like not defunding them or doing anything like that, not taking them away, but we want to make sure that they know actually what they're doing, and we want to make sure that they're with the people in front of people.
Thank you. Considering climate change and inflation, how is your administration going to address the 50-50 urgency on climate change, while also addressing the 70% majority in urgency around inflation? So most people are concerned about inflation as a general rule, but then people are divided upon whether climate change is an important matter or whether it is other matters that are urgent to them.
So the reason people, should I start?
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. So people think climate change isn't real just because people think we're taking advantage of it to make more money. But what we think is for the climate changes, we are increasing the. Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
So the people have a 50-50 concern on climate change of whether or not it is urgent to them. And so half of the people don't put climate change as the most urgent matter, well, half of people do put it as an urgent matter. And then in the background, you also have 70% of people do consider inflation the most urgent matter to them at this moment.
So we want to address which one is more urgent to us.
How are you going to balance out both of those urgencies?
Okay. So it's like, of course, inflation is highly correlated with the climate change because
Do you want to take a moment to think?
yes, please.
Okay. Would you guys like to start?
Yeah, so inflation is going to be our number one thing that we're running on because we do think it is the most urgent thing and that there is a crisis and the possibility to go into a recession right now, and it impacts every single American. So that's going to be our number one priority, and that is reflected in the polls that the vast majority, 70% think that is the number one priority. And then climate change, we do see that as a priority. However, it is not our number one priority because first of all, we need to get the American people in a good place, and then we can follow with getting the climate into a good place. We do believe climate change is real and that it's an important issue, but right now inflation is going to be first and foremost for us.
Are you guys ready to answer?
We plan to increase the use of electric cars and chargers. This will lower the cost of cars throughout the government. We plan to increase our public transportation, and we want to make it more accessible for everybody to move around the country and get to place fast. And we also want to create more jobs for the people, because that's a big issue right now, and we want to protect the people's jobs. We want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to make money and participate in the economy. So we want to create more jobs by creating more electrical, like power plants and stuff like that. And we'll ensure that all trade agreements like include climate restrictions. This method is supported by Dan Fagin, a prize-winning journalist who wrote these issues. By asking the environmental standards to be met as part of a trade agreement with other countries, we use our influence to make standards of the world and prevent simple offloading of environmental damage.
Thank you. Expanding on law and order and also considering education. Our lobbyists are interested in how you are going to protect the children in schools from weapons. Would you like to start?
Now they can start.
Okay, yeah, so I think this police training is really important as an aspect of school safety in regards to school shootings. So having even more police that are able to respond faster, that's a big crisis in school shootings. In multiple cases in the past year, police have not come fast enough, nor responded fast enough, and or knew what to do in the case of school shootings. Increasing training around that is really crucial. Having enough police that they can respond immediately and get to the situation before any damage is done, that's crucial. As well as increasing security within schools is really, really important. In my experience, having police officers on campus, having security on campus is really important to keep schools safe, and increasing that trust between the American people and the police, that kids can go to school and parents can send their kids to school safely knowing that if something happens, the police are there and they're ready and they're trustable.
I think that the whole school shooting issue is less of a like children issue and more of a gun issue in general. So I want to further the background checks, and we want to have like a more in-depth background check, and we want to have limits on automatic guns and a renewal every year of your gun registration to make sure that the gun's in your possession and not in some kid's hands or something like that. We also plan on implementing just not having any automatic rifles in general, and we want to work with mental health centers and provide students that are struggling with the help that they need to help their education.
My question is, how are you as candidates going to deal with protests turning violent and riots?
That's one of the main reasons that we want police reform, and that's why we want to train the police to be better, so we wouldn't have any riots in the first place. And a reason that we would, way that we would de-escalate that is by training them to know the people that they're working with personally, not even on an actual personal level, but getting to know the people and being around the situations.
Danielle.
So we are in favor of peaceful protests, and that is protected by our Constitution. However, we are not in favor of violent protests or breaking in, doing a lot of things that have happened in the past few years that are just really unfortunate. So something we would do is we would increase protest restrictions. Right now, there are very few protest restrictions. So we would put things in place to make sure protests stay peaceful, to make sure that there are better regulations on getting permits for these protests, because right now it's very unclear in a lot of states. And as well, we would train police to know what to do if a protest does go violent. What do we do? And not just throwing smoke bombs at people, actually having procedures and having a plan of action, because then it just turns into chaos, which doesn't help things.
Do you have a rebuttal? Do you have a rebuttal to their argument?
What tangible things would you do to train the police to know how to handle the protests, and what do you mean exactly by knowing them personally?
Knowing them personally meaning that the police in a certain area would know the people in their area. They wouldn't just be on their little just scroll through. It's not like they have their own jurisdiction. Each police officer has their jurisdiction in their area, and in their community, they should know the people there. They should know who this is, know who that is, and they should be able to, if there was a riot or something, they should know not who the people are, but they should know how to stop it and how to counteract it and work with them. And a way that we would, an exact way that we would make the police better is by having them go through background check and like a mental check, and to make sure that they're like okay mentally.
30 seconds left. Which lobbies?
Me. Oh, yeah.
Joshua, your question.
It's okay, Joe. You use the next one.
What's your question?
My question is, which industries or sectors will take the longest to recover, and what will you do in terms of economic policies to help?
Freddie.
Can you repeat the question?
I said, okay, so the first part of the question is, which industry or sectors will take the longest to recover, and what will you do in terms of economic policies to help? Yeah, that's about inflation. That's basically about inflation.
So inflation following
Like
COVID.
specifically, like for example, there's like electronics technology, and there's like oil and gases. So which in those areas would take the longest to recover, and what will you do in terms of economic policies in general to help?
For the oil and gas to recover, and we're okay with that because we were focusing on electric energy and more like electrical like efficiency, and we'll be raising the interest rates to help with inflation like in the 1980s.
I would agree that oil and gas is going to take the longest to recover due to the current state with the Russia and Ukraine war going on, and we've pulled out of taking gas reserves from Russia, and so that has made a big impact on the American economy in terms of our gas supply, which is obviously driving up gas rates. So something we would do in terms of that would be trying to make gas as cheap as possible by taking gas back from Russia, because we believe it is not hurting their economy to pull back our gas from them, because it is a very small percentage of we are a small consumer of their gas, but it's having massive impacts on our country, and it's not hurting their economy in the way that we were wanting it to, and it's only hurting our economy.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have a
My
question?
question is for Law and Order. What do you think are essential elements for a better policing program?
Freddie. A better policing program. Essential elements. We think that for like starters, we think that the mental health check is number one important, like the most important thing. And we also think that they should have those yearly, like just a yearly check on their mental state, because we don't like to have police that don't know what they're doing.
Danielle.
Yeah, so we would also be in favor of background checks on police. That already does happen, but just making sure that those questions are really specifically targeted for the issues we see in our police system currently. And then we would just equip them better, because I think a lot of our police are under-trained in certain areas. Obviously, have training in a lot of areas in terms of like speeding tickets, stuff like that, but having training on current issues that are coming up, so having more frequent trainings on if there are starting to be more protests in this way, having the police come back and be like, okay, what are we gonna do in this situation to de-escalate, and ultimately the priority being safety. So I think that's a really key element, is that the police know what to do in current situations, and not just training they maybe had 30 years ago, but that they're constantly getting new training and new information, and understanding new things that are happening in their jurisdictions, so that they're best able to respond in a way that everybody agrees is the same.
Connell, do you have a question?
Yes, I heard both sides talk about a freer market, but to what level would the government regulate that market?
Danielle.
Yeah, so in terms of government regulation on the economy and on the market, we are in favor of having a more free market and having less government regulation within that. Things that we think are still really important are things like the minimum wage. Obviously, that impacts a lot of us, and I think that's a really key part to our economic system, and that's a really good regulation that we have on businesses, so that people aren't getting underpaid, and that government or businesses can't take advantage of their employees by paying them very little. So we think that that's important to keep the minimum wage, but not overly putting restrictions on the economy is important to us. I think, just continuing to make decisions on that. I am not incredibly well versed on all the government restrictions on businesses. That is not a niche I have looked into very much, and that would be something that I would likely delegate.
We will not cut taxes though it seems like a beneficial idea to consumers, it will actually be detrimental to our economy. England, under a conservative government, tried this plan and received in recent months, and it ended horribly. They decreased taxes, and the economy fell completely, and it bottomed out, and that's why we think that we should not cut taxes, and that will help with inflation.
Do you have a rebuttal?
Yes, so in terms of taking that global example of England's economy functions very differently than America's economy, so we don't think that that's a fair comparison, as well as their conservative party is very different than our conservative party, so it's not fair to make that assumption and a blanket statement that both economies are the same and both conservative parties are the same.
Your rebuttal?
I never said that they were the same, I just compared them because they're both conservative, and they both are attempting the same thing, and it didn't work for England, so I don't think it'll work for the US.
Riley, your question?
Okay, so what is your plan towards making healthcare affordable for the average Americans while also relieving the financial burden from the taxpayers?
Freddie?
Can you repeat your question?
Riley?
Release.
What is your plan for making healthcare affordable for the average Americans while also relieving the financial burden from the taxpayers?
We want people to have the option to look at different types of healthcare and insurance, and unemployment is currently at its lowest, and it has been for the past 20 years, so we think that a way to help with the healthcare is to work with the pharmaceutical companies in lowering prescription drug costs for the consumers.
Do you have a rebuttal?
Can you see this thing?
I'm sorry. Let's check. Yes.
Yeah, so in order to answer your question about how are we going to make healthcare affordable while not putting anything on the taxpayers, that's a difficult question because oftentimes that is where the money comes from, is taxpayer money. So one way that we could go about that is by having companies have to give their employees healthcare, which is something that is somewhat in place depending on what kind of job you have. But we could increase those restrictions to give more people healthcare and a more affordable healthcare through their jobs, which would also increase employment because it gives people incentives to work, which is kind of a big issue right now that a lot of people are riding on unemployment from COVID. Yeah, and so increasing jobs would also increase more people who have access to healthcare from their jobs, which would make healthcare more affordable to the average family without putting it on taxpayers.
No.
Can I make a rebuttal?
2 minutes, your rebuttal.
2 minutes?
Okay, so for what Daniel says about let the company pay for the employees' healthcare, I would say since at this period after COVID, that lots of company needs recovery, and as long as they pay for their healthcare, there will be two only ways to maintain the company, which is the first way is lowering the employees' wage, which is making people pay less, or the other way, just trying to cooperate with this plan mandatorily, without thinking anything, which will eventually make the economy more collapse.
That was your presidential mock election press conference, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Caden, for hosting our press conference for us. Now, look forward to the debate, the live debate actually, on Friday during your elective period. And by Friday, the polls should be up, so start your voting and remember to vote. That'll be all for tonight. Jordan Curtis, signing off.